Hi folks. Well, today I wanted to talk to you about the island of St Kilda, which is one of the remotest parts of Scotland. It's located about 40 miles west of the Outer Hebrides, way out in the sort of wild North Atlantic Ocean. And people had lived on this remote island for thousands of years. Yet in 1930, the entire population of the island, which was only 36 people then, was evacuated to the mainland of Scotland. And so people wonder, how did this come about and what had happened? So I thought I'd try and explain a bit more to you in this video and perhaps give you a better understanding of it. So St Kilda is actually made up of 4 separate islands. The largest one is called Hurta, and this is where the islanders actually lived, in a village which was called the Village, and it lay on what was called Village Bay. And the other 3 islands are called Dun, Soe and Borey. And they were used mainly for grazing and for seabird hunting. So we know from archaeological evidence that humans had permanently inhabited St Kilda for more than 2,000 years. In 2015, an archaeological dig uncovered evidence of an early Neolithic settlement, and then subsequently archaeologists were working there in between 2017 and 2019, and they confirmed that habitation, that people had lived there as long ago as the Iron Age. So people had continually been living on this island for a very long time. The first written record, however, about St Kilda dates from around 1202, when an Icelandic cleric, a cleric from the island of Iceland, he wrote of taking shelter on the islands that are called Hurta. And there are early reports of people finding brooches and iron swords and Danish coins, and the names of the islands themselves obviously have a sort of Norse or a Nordic flavour to them. So the feeling is that probably indicates that there was a Viking presence on the island for some years at least, and perhaps longer. In the late 14th century, a Scottish chronicler from Aberdeen, a chap called John of Fordun, he referred to St Kilda as the island of Urta, and which he felt lay on the margins of the world. So this I think has been a view that many people have had over the centuries, that St Kilda really was on the edge of the world, because it is so far away and it's out in the Atlantic and it's very remote. So historically, the islands, they were part of the clan lands, the domains of the MacLeods of Harris, which is in the Outer Hebrides, and the clan chief there would send his steward over annually to collect rents and dues in kind. There was no money involved, it was just payments in kind from the people of St Kilda. And the first detailed report of a visit to the island dates from 1549, when a Donald Munro said that he described the inhabitants as simple, poor people, scarcely learned in any religion. But he did mention that MacLeod of Harris would send with his steward. He said that MacLeod would send a chaplain once a year with the steward to baptise the bairns, is what he said. So that was they were obviously concerned that they knew nothing about religion, or very little about religion. But I think this comes about because what comes over when you read about St Kilda all the time is that there was a real sense of isolation. Also, allied to a dependence by the islanders for their living on what they could get from the natural world. So that was two very strong themes, and as such, any religion or philosophy they had was probably much more akin to what the Druids would be saying as to say Christianity. And a report in 1764 commented on the existence of 5 old Druid altars, including a large circle of stones over on the island of Borrey. So they obviously had a form of philosophy or religion, whatever you want to call it, but it wasn't probably quite what people from the main parts of Scotland were used to. In 1615, the MacDonalds of Colonsay raided St Kilda, as they would, stole 30 sheep and a quantity of the poor islanders' barley. However, at this time, the islanders, or the islands, had a reputation, quite well known, for food abundance. And by 1697, the population had reached its highest ever of 180 people. That was the most ever lived on St Kilda, and that was in 1697. And there was comments about people going there and receiving lots of food and things like that. So they obviously weren't short of food in those days. However, from this time on, the population started a long-term decline. By 1851, it was down to 112, and then it fell to 70 in the 70s, at the 1861 census, 71 I think. And then over the following years it kept dropping away until May 1930. There were only these 36 souls left living there. So let's look at how their lives were and how did we arrive at this situation. If, for instance, in the 1600s there was an abundance of food, how did we arrive at that? So coming back to what I said at the start, the predominant theme about life on St Kilda, from everything you read, appears to be one of isolation. There was a famous Scottish writer called Martin Martin, and he wrote this book, a description of the Western Islands of Scotland, and he visited there in 1697 when he was writing this book, and the only means he had of getting there was by an open boat. And this could take several days and nights of rowing and sailing across the wild North Atlantic. I mean, you're not talking about some small inland sea here, you're talking about the North Atlantic. Journeys in autumn and winter were next to impossible. It's recorded that vicious storms could be expected at any time between September and March. So even just getting there was a hugely dangerous journey. Modern records now, they can take more modern records of the weather there, and they show that they can have severe gales on about 75 different days during the year. And so this is an island that, as well as being remote, experiences wild weather that makes it very difficult to get there. Also, the cliffs on St Kilda are the highest in Great Britain, so the sea cliffs, so even landing there is very difficult. Although, as I said, the village was on a bay called Village Bay, so it was a bit better there. So, coming back to how they lived there, separated by this distance and also by this extreme weather, really the inhabitants of St Kilda knew very little about what went on in the rest of the world, and certainly nothing of politics, on the mainland of Scotland, in Great Britain, or Europe, or the world. And it was a funny thing that was recorded was that after the Battle of Culloden in 1746, a rumour went round that Bonnie Prince Charlie and some of his senior Jacobite aides had escaped and had gone to St Kilda to hide. So an expedition was launched by the British government, and eventually, with the help of the Royal Navy, British soldiers were ferried ashore onto St Kilda. And there they found the village deserted, as the people of St Kilda, fearing that these men were pirates, had fled to caves over on the west coast of the island. However, they went and talked to them, and the people of St Kilda came down and were talking. And the soldiers were amazed that the people of St Kilda knew nothing at all about Bonnie Prince Charlie, the Jacobite rebellion, and in fact hadn't even heard of King George II of Britain or anything. They were totally unaware of any of these events that were taking place, these turbulent events that were taking place throughout Great Britain. And even by the late 19th century, so we're talking here the late 1800s, the islanders could only communicate with the rest of the world. I find this hard to believe, but it's true. The way they would communicate then would by lighting a bonfire on the summit of one of the mountains on the island, and hoping that, weather permitting, this bonfire would be seen by those living over on the Outer Hebrides, which seems a very precarious way to communicate if, for instance, there was an emergency. However, another way that was unique to St Kilda was developed at this time, and it's called the St Kilda mail boat, but it was not a mail boat as we would know it. This was the invention of a gentleman called John Sands, who was a Scottish artist, and he visited St Kilda in 1877, and he stayed with the islanders for a year. He was very interested in how people lived there, as well as wanting to obviously paint them and draw them. However, during his stay, a ship was wrecked on the island, and 9 Austrian sailors were marooned there. Now, obviously this put a bit of pressure on the supplies, the food supplies and the general supplies of the island, and by February supplies were running very low. So John Sands decided he had got a life buoy that had been salvaged from the wrecked ship, and he attached a message to it and threw it into the sea. And fortunately, 9 days later, it was picked up in Orkney, and a rescue was organised. So the people of St Kilda, having seen this work, they developed their own way of doing this. It was that they would fashion a piece of wood into the shape of a boat. They would make a bladder out of the skin of a sheep, which they would inflate, and they would attach the boat to it, and they would put a small bottle or tin with the message into the boat, and then waiting until the wind came from the northwest, so from Greenland and Canada and the Arctic, and it came whistling down. There's our grandfather clock chiming. Waiting till the wind came from the northwest, they would launch this in the hope that someone would get the message. And 2/3 of the messages actually found their way to the west coast of Scotland, which is quite good, I suppose. 2/3. Some, however, went further afield and were found in places like Norway and things like that. But what I think is amazing, we're talking here at the late 1800s, so at a time when, if you lived in Edinburgh, you could receive a letter posted in London, you could receive it the next day in Edinburgh. You could read the Scotsman newspaper on that day, every day in Edinburgh, and know everything that was going on all around the world. You could send telegrams to anywhere around the world. You could get a train and travel to get a steam liner and travel to America, and in America you could travel right across the continent of America by train at that time. And yet on St Kilda they were isolated and alone. It's amazing. However, another unique feature of the life for the people in St Kilda was their diet. So whilst they were able to keep some sheep and a few cattle, they were only able to grow a very small amount of food crops because the land was so poor on the island, and there was only really a bit around about the village that was suitable for cultivation. So they weren't able to grow much in the way of crops, so they weren't able to keep much livestock. And also because of the heavy seas, the huge cliffs, and the very unpredictable weather, they were not really able to fish in the waters surrounding the island. However, what they could do, and what they had done for those thousands of years, was they harvested island birds, especially gannets, fulmars and puffins. So these three birds, mostly gannets and fulmars, but they would also take puffins. This became the mainstay of their diet and of for use in their households. So they would take the eggs, and they would also take young birds, and they would eat them fresh and also cured. And it's said that St Kildans would eat puffins as a snack, which I'm sure some people are going to get a bit of a shock at, because puffins are such a lovely bird. But hey, they had to eat. And in the year 1876, it was recorded that the islanders in total took about 90,000 birds throughout the whole year for food and feathers. They used the feathers to stuff bedding, and the oil in the birds' stomachs, and that they were able to get the oil, and they used that as fuel and as medicine. So this was the mainstay of their life. Every day they ate seabirds or the eggs of seabirds every day. And catching the birds and catching the eggs involved huge skills, considerable skills in climbing and everything like that, especially as the birds nested on these huge sea cliffs, the highest in Great Britain. So sometimes women and girls would be lowered down in baskets to them, but sometimes it was the men climbing that did it. And as a sort of rite of passage for the young men of the island, they had to prove themselves on the cliffs to show that they were worthy of taking a wife. So it showed just how important harvesting the birds were. Another unique aspect of daily life in St Kilda was that every day they held what they called a parliament, and this was a meeting held in the street every morning after prayers, and it was attended by all the adult males on the island, and there were only 18 houses on the island, so you could understand that the village was in a semicircle and contained 18 houses, so it wasn't big, but all the adult males would attend this parliament, and no one led the meeting, and everyone had the right to speak. So they would decide at that meeting what had to be done that day, what work had to be done, what had to be sorted out, and everything like that. And that was how it was done. So this was their daily parliament. Women and children did not participate in the parliament, but however they did do a lot of work. Women carried a lot of the burden of the work, but that was how it operated. However, things were changing, and this was what was going to impact on St Kilda and the life of the people in St Kilda. So in September 1852, 36 inhabitants of St Kilda decided to leave for Australia, and they left on board a ship called Priscilla, and this was a ship carrying migrants under a new scheme that was organised and funded by the Highlands and Islands Emigration Society, which encouraged people from Scotland and helped them to emigrate to the New Worlds. Many of them going to Australia, obviously many going to America and Canada. However, this scale of emigration was unprecedented for St Kilda. 36 out of probably 120 odds or something at that time. It was unprecedented. And to be honest, the population never recovered from this one emigration of this one group leaving. So the 36 inhabitants, they sailed first from St Kilda to Skye, where they then stayed for 2 weeks, and then they took a vessel from there, from Skye, to the Broomielaw in Glasgow, which was quite a famous route for people emigrating from the Western Highlands. In fact, June and I have stood on the pier where many of them left. So they were down in, so it took them about a month to get down to Glasgow. And then a ship called the Princess Royal took them to Birkenhead, which is the port of Liverpool, or just outside Liverpool, where again they had to wait for a couple of weeks before they boarded the ship Priscilla. And the voyage from Birkenhead to Port Phillip, which is in Victoria, southern part of Victoria in Australia, took 98 days. However, sadly, this was a journey that witnessed many deaths and many illnesses, a lot of it caused by measles. And this was one of the problems that the inhabitants of St Kilda had, and increasingly had to face up to, was that they had little or no resistance to many diseases. So whilst they had come through centuries of no contact or very little contact with anybody, all of a sudden, as they came into increased contact, it did create huge problems for them. For example, on that, one of the families that left St Kilda were the McQueen family. So there was Finlay McQueen and his wife Catherine, and they had six children, I think. Yeah. So on arrival, Finlay, the father, and Catherine were already dead, as was one of their children. So there's 3 already dead. The next day after they arrived, their youngest son, 3-year-old, who was also called Finlay, died. So that's 4 gone. So that was 5 orphans left. So sorry, they had 7 children, Finlay and Catherine. So there was 5 orphans left. The oldest of which was 18, so that was quite good. But sadly, they encountered further tragedy when they were put up in a bush hut, and this bush hut burned down, and they lost everything, and they were left with nothing but rags on their backs. Terrible blow for that family, the McQueen family. Out of the 36 emigrants who left, 19 died. So only 17 survived that trip to the new life in Australia. During the 19th century, steamers began to visit St Kilda, and this enabled the islanders to earn money from the sale of homemade tweeds and birds' eggs and everything like that. But there was also a downside, as there always is, I suppose you could say, argue with tourism, was that it was felt that they lost a lot of self-esteem and confidence in a way, because the tourists regarded them as curiosities. Here was these strange people living these strange lives. And these people were probably fairly wealthy people who'd come from wealthy cities around the world, and were coming to view this. And I think it's something about tourism that we have to always be aware of. However, the boats also brought with them, as I mentioned, other diseases that the islanders had no immunity to, and this did wreak havoc with their health. And especially infant tetanus was introduced, and this ended up with the infant mortality rate on St Kilda at the end of the 19th century was as high as 80%, which is what a tragedy for a small community like this, that 8 out of 10 babies were dying because of this disease. However, early 20th century, some things did improve. improved midwifery skills, helped reduce the problem of the infant mortality, formal schooling. The children were now getting formal schooling. The church was extended to make a schoolhouse for them. The children learned English along with their native Gaelics. That was good. And trawlers fishing around the North Atlantic now started to make regular visits, bringing in additional trade. And so the islanders, for the first time probably in 2,000 years, saw the introduction of regular contact with the outside world, and the kind of slow introduction of what you might call a money-based economy, which obviously they had never had before. They had never even dreamt about money or used money at all. So this made life a lot easier for them, but however, it also made them less self-reliant. And this was the double-edged sword. The First World War started there, and very early on the Royal Navy decided to erect a signal station which was manned on St Kilda, and daily communications with the mainland were established for the very first time. There were regular deliveries of mail and food from the mainland by naval supply ships. So at last the islanders could write to people and receive letters from them. They could receive parcels, they could get food supplies. But however, at the end of the war, the signal station was closed, and that service was withdrawn. The naval supply vessels stopped visiting, and that, people reckon, it really increased the sense of isolation for the islanders, because they'd experienced something and then it was taken away. Also, what happened then was many of the young male islanders left and to seek out a better life, and that really kind of resulted in the economy, the island economy, that special island economy where you were self-reliant and everybody did everything, starting to break down. So it was because, I suppose, in a way, they had existed for these centuries in isolation, that these changes, which they liked, but it disconnected them from the way of life that had allowed their forefathers to survive, that the only way to survive in this difficult environment, and they became a bit disconnected from that. So really, you could say that because of this, the islanders started to seek alternatives. Were there alternatives, to the, you might call it, the privations that they routinely suffered? So they did. They suffered, and now I suppose they were more aware of what they were having to suffer on a daily basis. It started to be in their mind. Also, as I said, with most of the young men leaving, the population plummeted. So it went from, in 1920, it was 73, which was low enough. And by 28 years later, there was only 37 souls left on St Kilda. And there was a couple of issues that really, made the islanders think long and hard. So in 1926, 4 men died from influenza. Then there was a succession of crop failures during the 1920s, which put further strain on them. But then the final straw is thought to be, for the islanders, the death of there was a young pregnant woman, Mary Gillis, and she fell ill with appendicitis, and she was taken, this was in 1930, in January 1930, and she was taken to the mainland for treatment, but she tragically died in hospital, as did her newborn baby. So the residents of St Kilda decided together that they would write and petition the British government and ask them if they could be resettled on the mainland. So the British government agreed, and on the 29th of August 1930, they boarded the Royal Naval ship HMS Harebell, and they left their island home for the very last time. And so, this way of life that had gone on uninterrupted for 2,000 years or more came to an end. But a good life awaited the residents who had left. They were given houses to live in Ardnamurchan, which is a remote part of Scotland. So they weren't taken to cities where they would have felt out at odds. So they were given good houses in a remote community. And many of the men were given jobs in the Forestry Commission working in the forests, which would be a good job for them. And it was interesting, I read that in 2016, so just 5 years ago, the last surviving native of St Kilda, a lady called Rachel Gillis, died, and she was 93-year-old. And so, she had lived, obviously, most of her life here. She lived most of it up in Ardnamurchan, although latterly she did come down to stay with her son in near Glasgow. So she was only 8-year-old when she and her family were taken off the island along with the rest of them. And she remembers that as a child, her duties had included being lowered by rope down the cliffs to scoop up puffin eggs and the eggs of gannets and fulmars. And she would help her mother prepare meals. And also she'd be sent to walk along the shore to collect seaweed, which the islanders would dry and burn as a fuel. So she had all these memories about her life there, which she loved, but also she loved her new life, and it was interesting reading about her. She in no way regretted that, but she still loved looking back on her old life there. So I know many people will say how sad it was that this came to an end, and in some ways I feel that as well, but in other ways I think about the people themselves, and I think I'm just going to show you a cutting from a Scottish newspaper here, and I think it shows that for the people concerned, they wanted a better life, and this was the way they got it. Now, I've never visited St Kilda. Whilst June and I were staying on Skye once, a gentleman there offered to take us in his yacht to St Kilda, but regrettably the weather the next day was atrocious, which I suppose highlights this problem with St Kilda, so we couldn't go. But I did have the very good fortune to meet a lady who had been born in St Kilda and who had been evacuated in 1930, and I met her in 1980, I think it was, and it was in Ardnamurchan in Loch Allen, and it wasn't this lady Rachel Gillis. I thought at first when I started to reading about Rachel it was, but Rachel was too young then. This lady was quite old at that time, and I was very kindly invited into her house and chatted to her. She was a lovely, lovely lady, very softly spoken, and she loved her life where she was now, but she talked very fondly about life on St Kilda. But I don't think she was in a Forestry Commission house. I don't think she was sad at leaving. She was, I suppose, like all of us, she'd be thinking back the memories. But she had had a very good life once she'd come ashore, and loved where she lived in that remote part. She said it was good that they came to a remote part, because she felt that if they had been sent to somewhere, a big city, for them it would have been too much. So they just loved living there. So I was really pleased that I did meet someone who had been born and brought up on this amazing island, and she was quite old when she left. That's why I know it wasn't this Rachel Gillis. She wasn't a just young girl. So I'm really pleased that I did meet her. So St Kilda is now owned by the National Trust for Scotland, and together with the Scottish Natural Heritage, they run conservation projects on the island. It is Europe's most important seabird colony, and it's one of the major seabird nesting stations in the North Atlantic. And as far as I know, you can visit it during the summer months, although obviously it will be weather dependent. Anyway, I do hope you enjoyed this little insight into one of Scotland's remotest islands, and until we meet again, I just want to wish you all the very best from Scotland.